In the storm-ravaged Sierra Madre Mountains along the Texas border, a quiet 27-year-old meteorologist was about to walk into a conspiracy that had been killing Marines for 5 years. What started as routine weather analysis took a shocking turn when she came face to face with the same radar anomaly that had swallowed her brother's helicopter whole. Hannah Cole wasn't your typical civilian volunteer. For 5 years, she had spent her life tracking storms from a desolate weather station, known for seeing patterns in data that everyone else dismissed as coincidence. When she encountered 8 missing Marines trapped in a ravine with evidence of deliberate sabotage, she had no idea she was stepping into the crosshairs of a high-ranking officer's cover-up operation. Hannah made a decision that would lead to exposing Operation Silencer, a conspiracy reaching into the Pentagon itself. What began as a search and rescue mission would become a fight for survival through flash floods, sniper fire, and biblical lightning storms. The entire military command structure would never be the same after a quiet girl from a small Texas town refused to let the truth stay buried in the mountains. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The radar screen painted the Sierra Madre Mountains in shades of red and purple that Hannah Cole had learned to fear. At 27, she'd spent 5 years studying storms, tracking their temperaments like a psychologist analyzing behavioral patterns. This one was different. This one had teeth. The weather station perched on the edge of nowhere, 60 miles from the nearest town, a collection of trailers and satellite dishes clinging to the Texas borderlands like barnacles on a ship's hull. Hannah's workspace consisted of 3 monitors, a coffee maker that hadn't been cleaned since the Bush administration, and a window that looked out over terrain so desolate it made the moon seem inviting. Most days, she tracked precipitation patterns and filed reports that 3 people would read. Most days were predictable. This Tuesday in November was not most days.
Hannah, you seeing this?
Rick Zamora's voice crackled through the station intercom. Her supervisor worked in the main trailer, 30 yards away, but he refused to walk anywhere when technology could do the job.
That cell structure over Sector 7 is building vertical like I've never seen it.
Hannah leaned closer to her monitor, fingers flying across the keyboard to isolate the anomaly. The superstorm had been forming for 18 hours, a slow-motion catastrophe gathering strength over the mountains. But what caught her attention wasn't the storm's size. It was the pattern underneath it. A shimmer in the radar data like static on an old television, precisely where no interference should exist. She pulled up the historical overlay, comparing current readings to the archive from 5 years ago. Her breath caught in her throat. The pattern was identical, down to the frequency signature, down to the exact geographic coordinates where her brother's helicopter had vanished without a trace. "Rick," she said slowly, keying the intercom with hands that had started to shake. "We need to call this in. Something's wrong with the data stream over the crash zone."
What crash zone? Hannah, nobody's crashed.
She was about to respond when every screen in her station flashed red. Emergency alert, priority channel. The automated voice that followed carried the flat, emotionless tone of systems delivering bad news.
Attention all stations. Military aircraft reported missing. Last known position, Sierra Madre Range, Sector 7, Delta. 8 personnel on board. All search and rescue assets being deployed. Weather stations maintain continuous monitoring protocols.
Hannah's coffee cup slipped from her fingers, shattering against the floor. She barely noticed. 8 Marines. The same mountains. The same interference pattern that had swallowed her brother Ethan whole 5 years ago, leaving behind nothing but questions and a folded flag delivered to their mother's doorstep. The phone on her desk screamed to life. She grabbed it before the second ring. "Cole?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt.
This is Major Evelyn Carver, Air Force SAR Coordination. I need your station's real-time meteorological data on Sector 7. Immediate transmission.
Major, there's an anomaly in the radar signature. It's not just weather. There's signal interference consistent with... Miss Cole, I need data, not theories. Can you provide detailed terrain mapping and storm tracking for the search grid? Hannah pulled up the files, her analyst brain overriding the emotional storm building in her chest. She transmitted the data package, then took a breath that felt like swallowing broken glass. Major Carver, my brother was Marine Captain Ethan Cole. He disappeared in this exact region 5 years ago. The interference pattern I'm seeing now matches what we recorded before he vanished. This isn't coincidence. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Hannah checked to see if the call had dropped. When Carver finally spoke, her voice had changed. Softer, more human. I know who your brother was, Miss Cole. I was one of his flight instructors at Pensacola. Another pause. The official search team deploys in 90 minutes. We need someone who understands this terrain and these storm systems. Someone who can analyze real-time weather data in the field. The major's voice dropped lower. Someone who has personal reasons to look where others might not. Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs. Are you asking me to volunteer? I'm asking if you're willing to do what your brother would have done. Find them before the storm does. 20 minutes later, Hannah was throwing gear into her weatherproofed field pack. Emergency rations, water purification tablets, the portable drone system she'd modified for long-range atmospheric sampling, spare batteries, first aid kit, climbing rope she'd probably never use, but her brother had taught her to always carry. Her hands moved with mechanical efficiency while her mind raced through probability calculations and risk assessments and the memory of Ethan's last message before his final flight. Weather looks perfect, Han. Textbook mission. I'll call you from base tonight. Don't eat all Mom's pecan pie before I get there. He never called. The weather hadn't been perfect. Nothing about that day had been textbook. Hannah zipped the pack closed and reached for her field jacket. Something fell from the pocket, hitting the floor with a soft thud. Ethan's journal. She'd forgotten she'd tucked it there 6 months ago during one of her ritual rereadings, searching for clues everyone else had dismissed as a grieving sister's desperate patterns. The journal's leather cover was scarred from years of use, pages filled with Ethan's tight, efficient handwriting, flight notes, terrain observations, weather patterns he'd tracked during training missions, and scattered throughout, coordinates that didn't match any official maps, places he'd found while flying routes that command swore didn't exist. Hannah flipped to the last entry, dated 3 days before he disappeared. Something's off about these routine patrols. Same sectors, same altitudes, but we're told to maintain radio silence over specific coordinates. Found ruins today that aren't on any chart. Someone's using these mountains for something. Ask Lieutenant Mendez about it. He told me to stop asking questions. That's not how Marines work. We don't turn blind eyes. If anything happens, Han, look at the weather data. The truth hides in the patterns everyone else ignores. You'll see it. You've always seen what others miss. Love you, little storm chaser. Keep watching the skies for me. Hannah pressed the journal against her chest, eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. Not yet. Not while 8 Marines were out there facing whatever had taken Ethan. She shoved the journal into her pack's inner pocket, next to the drone controls. I'm looking, Ethan. I promise, I'm still looking. The helicopter that collected her from the weather station was a UH-60 Blackhawk, its rotors beating the desert air into submission. Hannah climbed aboard with 5 search and rescue specialists, their faces set in the grim determination of people who'd done this too many times before. They nodded at her, but didn't speak. She was the civilian, the outsider, the weather girl with theories. Major Evelyn Carver met them at the forward staging area, a hastily erected command post where the paved roads surrendered to wilderness. She was shorter than Hannah expected, maybe 5'6", with iron-gray hair pulled back in a regulation bun, and eyes that had seen too many operations go wrong. Miss Cole. She extended a hand. Thank you for responding so quickly. Hannah shook it, surprised by the grip's strength. Thank you for letting me help, Major. Don't thank me yet. She gestured toward a table covered with topographic maps and satellite imagery. The missing aircraft is a CH-53E Super Stallion. 8 Marines, including Captain Marcus Duran, one of our best tactical team leaders. Last communication was 18 minutes before they vanished from radar. No distress call, no emergency beacon, just gone. Hannah studied the maps, her trained eye picking out terrain features and elevation changes. The storm cell is intensifying faster than models predicted. We're looking at flash flood potential in all the valley systems within 3 hours, which is why we're moving now. Carver tapped a spot on the map. Your job is to monitor weather conditions and help navigate terrain that our GPS systems are having trouble mapping. The satellite imagery keeps glitching over this entire sector because of the interference pattern. Hannah pulled out her tablet, showing Carver the data. See this? It's not atmospheric, it's electronic. Someone's broadcasting a signal that's disrupting navigation and communication systems. Carver's jaw tightened. You're suggesting deliberate sabotage. I'm suggesting the data doesn't lie. Whatever took that helicopter down, weather was only part of the equation. For a long moment, Carver stared at the maps, her fingers drumming a nervous rhythm against the table edge. When she looked up, her expression had hardened into something that looked like decision. Your brother thought the same thing 5 years ago. He came to me 2 weeks before he disappeared, showed me flight data that suggested someone was manipulating mission parameters. She paused. I told him he was seeing patterns that weren't there, that grief over losing his father was making him paranoid. Carver's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I was wrong, and I've carried that weight ever since. Hannah felt something shift in her chest. Validation, maybe, or the terrible confirmation that Ethan's instincts had been right all along, and it had cost him everything. Then let's make sure we don't lose 8 more Marines to whatever we missed the first time, Hannah said. Carver nodded once, sharp and decisive. Gear up. We move in 10 minutes. And Hannah. The Major's eyes held hers with unexpected intensity. Your brother was one of the best pilots I ever trained. He'd be proud of what you're doing. Hannah blinked back tears for the second time that day and focused on checking her equipment. Pride wouldn't find the missing Marines. Preparation might. The convoy consisted of 3 Humvees and 2 smaller all-terrain vehicles designed for terrain where roads became suggestions rather than certainties. Hannah rode in the second vehicle with Major Carver, a medic named Lopez, and a sergeant whose name badge read Kowalski, but whose expression read, "Don't talk to me." The sky had turned the color of old bruises, purple and gray with veins of sickly yellow where the sun tried to break through. Hannah's tablet showed the storm cell rotating with increasing violence, its structure building into what meteorologists called a mesocyclone. In Texas, that meant tornado potential. In mountains, it meant flash floods capable of moving boulders like marbles. Communications are degrading faster than expected, Carver said from the passenger seat, her radio crackling with static. Base, this is Rescue 1. Confirm your last. We're losing signal integrity. The response was garbled, words chopped into syllables by interference. Hannah checked her own equipment. The drone systems were functioning, its independent satellite links still strong. Ethan had taught her to never rely on military channels alone. Always have a backup, Han. Systems fail. People fail. You need redundancy in everything. Major. Hannah pulled up a 3-dimensional terrain map on her tablet. The primary route into Sector 7 follows the canyon floor, but if this storm breaks the way I think it will, that canyon becomes a death trap. There's a ridge route 3 clicks north, steeper but elevated above flood potential. Carver studied the map, then keyed her radio. All units, we're adjusting approach vector. Follow my lead on the northern ridgeline. Ma'am, that rot isn't on our tactical maps. It's on the civilian meteorologist's map, and right now I trust her data more than our GPS. Execute the diversion. Hannah felt a flutter of vindication mixed with responsibility. If she was wrong, she'd just added 30 minutes to the search time. If she was right, she'd saved them from driving into a wall of water. 20 minutes later, as they climbed the ridge trail, Hannah heard the roar behind them. She turned to see water surging through the canyon they would have taken, a brown torrent carrying trees and debris with the force of industrial machinery. Christ, Kowalski muttered. His expression toward Hannah shifted from suspicion to something resembling respect. The first lightning strike hit close enough that Hannah felt the electromagnetic pulse in her teeth.
The sky had gone fully dark now, storm clouds pressing down like a ceiling collapsing in slow motion. Rain began as scattered drops, then escalated to sheets that turned the windshield into an impressionist painting. "Visibility's down to maybe 20 meters," their driver called out. "Major, we need to find shelter or risk—" The second lightning strike hit the communications array mounted on the lead vehicle. Hannah watched it explode in a shower of sparks, the vehicle swerving before the driver regained control. "All units, primary comms are down," Carver announced on the backup channel. "Maintain visual contact. We push forward until—"
The third strike wasn't lightning. It was wind, a sudden gust that hit their vehicle broadside with enough force to lift the right side wheels off the ground. Hannah grabbed the door handle, her body slamming against the restraint belt as gravity made temporary decisions about which way was up. "Hang on." The driver fought the wheel, but physics had already made its ruling. The vehicle tilted past the point of no return, sliding sideways off the trail and into the scrub brush that clung to the mountainside. Hannah's world became a kaleidoscope of motion and impact, the crunch of metal against rock, the shattering of glass, someone screaming, maybe her, maybe Lopez, maybe the mountain itself protesting their intrusion. The vehicle rolled once, twice, 3 times before wedging against a cluster of boulders that saved them from a 500-foot tumble into the ravine below. When motion stopped, Hannah hung upside down in her harness, blood rushing to her head, rain pouring through the shattered windshield. Her training kicked in before panic could. Check for injuries, assess the situation, don't move until you know what's broken. "Everyone alive?" Carver's voice came from somewhere in the wreckage, strained but functional. "Alive," Hannah managed, "mostly." "Lopez is unconscious," Kowalski reported. "Head trauma. I need to stabilize her before we move." Hannah released her harness, dropping onto what had been the vehicle's ceiling. Pain flared in her left shoulder, bruised, maybe sprained, but functional. She crawled through the wreckage, glass cutting her palms until she found her field pack wedged behind the driver's seat. Miracle of miracles, it was intact. "Major, can you reach the radio?" Hannah asked, pulling herself through the broken window. "Dead. Everything's dead. That last strike fried all our electronics." Hannah stood in the rain, taking stock. The vehicle was destroyed. They were somewhere on the ridgeline, separated from the rest of the convoy by terrain and weather. Her tablet flickered to life when she powered it on. The ruggedized case had protected it. The drone case had survived too, though she'd need to test the equipment before trusting it. Then she saw the smoke. It rose from a ravine maybe 2 kilometers distant, a thin gray plume barely visible through the rain. Too isolated to be natural, too sustained to be lightning strike aftermath. "Major," Hannah helped Carver climb out of the wreckage. She followed Hannah's gaze, squinting through the downpour. Her face went through a rapid evolution of expressions: hope, determination, fear, resolve. "Kowalski, how's Lopez?" "Stable enough to move if we're careful." "But Major, we're cut off. No comms, no extraction capability, and that storm's still building." Hannah pulled Ethan's journal from her pack, its pages somehow dry despite the chaos. She flipped to one of his annotated maps, comparing it to her tablet's display. The coordinates matched. This ravine, this exact location appeared in her brother's notes with a single word written in his careful hand: hidden. "There's a trail," Hannah said, tracing a path on the map. "It's not on official charts, but my brother marked it. If we can reach that smoke before nightfall, we might find survivors." Carver looked at Hannah with an expression that mixed professional assessment with something deeper. Trust, maybe, or the recognition that they were past the point where rank mattered more than capability. "All right, Weather Girl," the Major said, and there was no mockery in the nickname. "You navigate, we follow. But if that trail leads us wrong, it won't. My brother never made mistakes with terrain, not once." They moved into the mountains as the storm swallowed the world behind them.
The trail that didn't exist proved to be everything Hannah had promised and nothing anyone wanted to experience. It threaded through gaps in the rock face that seemed designed to scrape skin from bone, crossed ledges where one misstep meant oblivion, and descended through terrain that turned into waterfalls as the rain continued its assault. Hannah led, one hand gripping Ethan's journal like a talisman, the other holding her tablet as she cross-referenced his notes with real-time topography. Behind her, Carver and Kowalski carried Lopez on an improvised stretcher made from tree branches and their field jackets. The medic had regained consciousness, but remained disoriented, occasionally muttering about heading home for dinner. "How much further?" Kowalski called over the wind.
Hannah checked the coordinates. "Half a click, but we're descending into a valley. If the smoke's gone..." "It's still there," Carver said, pointing through a break in the trees. The smoke had diminished to almost nothing, but Hannah could see the wreckage now. A CH-53E Super Stallion lay crumpled against the ravine wall like a child's broken toy. One rotor was gone entirely. The tail section had sheared off and landed 50 meters away. The fuselage bore scorch marks that spoke of fire briefly burning before the rain drowned it. No one could have survived that. Except, as they approached, Hannah saw movement. A figure emerged from beneath a shelter made of parachute fabric and helicopter panels. He was tall, heavily built, with dark skin and the kind of bearing that suggested he'd walked through worse than crashed helicopters and lived to tell the story. "Friendly!" Carver shouted, raising her hands. "Major Evelyn Carver, Air Force SAR! We're here to help!" The man studied them for a moment that stretched into eternity. Then he nodded once and called over his shoulder, "Mac, we've got company, the good kind." 3 more Marines emerged from the makeshift shelter. One limped heavily, supported by another. The 4th moved with the careful precision of someone nursing internal injuries. They looked like they'd been through a war zone, which, Hannah supposed, they had. The first man approached, extending a hand to Carver. "Captain Marcus Duran, you have excellent timing, Major. Another hour and we'd have been underwater." "How many survivors?" Carver asked. 6 of us. Staff Sergeant Mendez has a compound fracture. Corporal Wright has internal bleeding we can't stop without real medical equipment. The others are ambulatory but hurting." Duran's eyes moved to Hannah, assessing her with the flat efficiency of someone trained to evaluate threats and assets. "You're civilian." "Hannah Cole, meteorologist and terrain specialist." She set down her pack. "I have medical supplies and communication equipment. Where are your wounded?" "Inside the shelter, but our medics already..." Hannah was already moving, ducking under the parachute canopy. The interior smelled of blood and fear and the particular funk of men who'd been fighting for survival. 2 Marines lay on the ground, wrapped in thermal blankets that probably came from the survival kit every military aircraft carried. The one with the broken leg, Mendez, she assumed, had his limb splinted with pieces of metal and parachute cord, professional work under impossible conditions. The younger Marine beside him was pale, his breathing shallow and his abdomen distended in a way that made Hannah's limited medical training scream internal hemorrhage. "I'm Hannah," she said gently, kneeling beside them. "I need to check your injuries." "You a doctor?" Mendez asked through gritted teeth. "Meteorologist, but I've had field medical training, and I'm what's available." She pulled out her first aid kit, grateful for the comprehensive supplies she always carried. "How long since the crash?" 4 hours, give or take." A new voice spoke from the shadows. A younger Marine emerged, maybe mid-20s, with the kind of sharp features and expressive eyes that suggested humor even in hell. His uniform name tape read ROS. 4 hours of wondering if anyone was coming. 4 hours of Mac telling us to stay positive while we all thought about writing last letters home. Hannah worked as she listened, checking vitals, replacing bandages, administering pain medication from her kit. Mendez's leg needed surgery, and soon. Wright needed a hospital and possibly a miracle. The others had the kind of injuries that hurt like hell but wouldn't kill you if you were tough enough. "Your radio equipment?" Hannah asked Ross. "Fried. Whatever hit us scrambled everything electronic. Lucky the helicopter had enough momentum to glide partway down or we'd have dropped like a stone." Ross studied her with undisguised curiosity. "You came all this way in this storm to find us?" "Part of the search team. Our vehicle crashed too. We're all stranded until the weather clears enough for extraction." "Great. Rescued by people who also need rescuing. That's poetic." Hannah almost smiled.
Almost. She moved to check on the other Marines when her tablet, still connected to her pack outside, emitted a soft alert. She excused herself and crawled back into the rain. Carver and Duran were in deep discussion, but both stopped when Hannah pulled up her tablet. The drone's passive sensors had been recording since they descended into the valley. Now they'd picked up something. "What is it?" Duran asked.
Hannah isolated the signal, running it through filters to separate it from the storm's interference. What emerged was a pattern. Regular. Pulsed. Definitely artificial. "There's a transmission source nearby, close enough that my drone's picking it up despite all this weather." She adjusted the parameters, narrowing the location. "It's coming from approximately 300 meters northeast on the ridgeline above us." Duran and Carver exchanged a look that carried the weight of professional paranoia. "That's wrong," Duran said quietly. "We're in the middle of nowhere. There shouldn't be any electronic signatures except emergency beacons." "Unless someone put them there," Hannah said, feeling the pieces align in her mind the same way Ethan's journal entries had suggested. "Unless whoever caused your crash is monitoring to make sure you didn't survive." Ross joined them, his earlier humor replaced by combat readiness. "Captain, the rookie's saying what we've all been thinking. This wasn't mechanical failure. I felt the helicopter's controls seize up mid-flight, like someone flipped a switch and turned us off." "You have proof of that?" Carver asked. "I have radar interference patterns identical to the ones that appeared before my brother's helicopter disappeared 5 years ago. I have notes from his journal describing signal jamming in this exact region, and I have a transmission source that has no business existing on that ridgeline." She looked at Duran directly. "Someone shot you down, Captain, and they're still watching." Duran's expression hardened into something that belonged on battlefields. He glanced at the shelter where his wounded waited, then back at the mountains where threats lurked in the rain. "Then we move before they realize we're not all dead." He raised his voice. "Marines, pack it up. We're relocating. Anyone who can walk, you're walking. Anyone who can't, we carry." "Captain, with respect, Corporal Wright can't be moved," Ross protested. "Then we make him a stretcher, but we're not sitting here waiting to become target practice." Duran turned to Hannah. "You got us this far, Cole. Can you get us out?" Hannah pulled up Ethan's maps, comparing them to her current position data. Her brother had marked several sheltered positions throughout these mountains, places where elevation and rock formations provided both cover and defensive advantages. The nearest was a cave system half a click south, reachable if they moved carefully. "I can get us to cover, but Captain, I need to be honest, I'm not rescue. I'm the person who reads weather patterns and files reports. I've never led anyone anywhere except to better observation points." Duran stepped close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of command that had been compounded by survival. "Miss Cole, my men are alive because someone taught them to adapt and overcome. You're alive because someone taught you to read terrain and weather better than anyone else in these mountains. Right now, that makes you exactly the person we need." He extended his hand. "So what do you say? Think a quiet meteorologist from Texas can lead a bunch of broken Marines to safety?" Hannah looked at his hand, then at the Marines emerging from the shelter. Mendez gritting his teeth against pain, Wright pale but conscious, Ross ready to fight despite impossible odds. Men who'd trained their entire lives for combat, now dependent on a woman who'd spent her life watching storms from the safety of a weather station. She thought of Ethan, of his last journal entry. "You'll see what others miss, Han. You've always seen." Hannah shook Duran's hand. "Let's find out." And she led them into the rain. The rain had become a living thing, clawing at their faces as they moved through the ravine. Hannah led with her tablet shielded under her jacket, Duran at her shoulder, the rest of the Marines forming a protective formation around their wounded. Every 50 meters, she stopped to recalibrate their position against Ethan's maps, each pause a small victory against the mountain's attempt to swallow them whole. They'd been moving for 20 minutes when Hannah noticed the footprints. Fresh ones.
boot treads pressed into mud that the rain hadn't yet dissolved, leading away from the crash site toward the ridgeline where her drone had detected the transmission source. "Captain," she pointed without speaking. Duran's hand went to his sidearm. He signaled Ross and another Marine forward. They followed the tracks for 30 meters before finding what Hannah had feared they'd find: an observation post, camouflaged tarp, empty ration packages, cigarette butts, and binoculars still pointed toward the helicopter wreckage. "Someone was watching to see if we died," Ross said quietly. Hannah's mind raced through possibilities, discarding coincidence and landing on the only explanation that fit the data. They needed to confirm casualties, which means they know the crash wasn't fatal, which means...
"They're looking for us now," Duran finished. His expression had gone cold, the kind of cold that came from understanding you were prey instead of predator. "We need to move faster. Cole, how far to that cave system?" 300 meters. But, Captain, we need to examine the helicopter wreckage first. We don't have time for... If this was sabotage, there'll be evidence. Mechanical tampering, navigation corruption, something that proves this wasn't an accident. Hannah met his eyes. "My brother died because no one believed his crash was anything more than pilot error. I won't let that happen to your team." Duran studied her for a long moment, then nodded sharply. 5 minutes, then we move regardless." They returned to the wreckage, and Hannah approached the twisted metal with Ethan's journal open to a page titled, "What to Look For." Her brother had been meticulous, documenting every system that could be compromised, every failsafe that could be overridden. She climbed into the helicopter's broken fuselage, ignoring the way the metal groaned under her weight. The navigation console was destroyed, but Hannah knew what she was looking for. She traced wiring harnesses, checking connection points until she found it. A small device, military-grade, attached to the helicopter's flight computer. It was the size of a deck of cards, matte black, with a single indicator light that still blinked red in the darkness. "Captain, you need to see this." Duran crawled in beside her. When he saw the device, his jaw clenched. "That's not standard equipment." "No, it's a remote override module. Someone installed this to take control of your helicopter systems mid-flight." Hannah carefully photographed it with her tablet. "This is murder, Captain. Premeditated and executed with precision." Ross appeared at the opening. "Found something else. The fuel system's been compromised. Manual valve tampering disguised to look like impact damage." Hannah's hands shook as she pulled out Ethan's journal, flipping to an entry from 3 weeks before he disappeared. The sketch there showed an identical device, attached to an identical system, with her brother's notation, "Found in wreckage during training exercise. Command dismissed it as foreign debris, but serial number matches U.S. military procurement codes. Someone inside is doing this." "Operation Silencer," Hannah whispered, reading the name Ethan had circled repeatedly in his notes. "What?" "My brother found evidence of classified missions being sabotaged to cover up something bigger. Helicopters going down in remote areas, crews lost, investigations closed quickly. He was trying to expose it when he disappeared." The crack of a rifle shot split the air. Rock exploded beside Hannah's head, shrapnel cutting her cheek. Duran grabbed her, hauling them both out of the helicopter as more shots echoed through the ravine. "Contact! Northeast Ridge!" One of the Marines returned fire, his rifle barking in controlled bursts. "Move, move, move!" Duran shouted, and the group scattered toward cover. Hannah ran through a nightmare painted in rain and gunfire. Bullets chewed through foliage and cracked against stone, each shot a promise of death deferred by inches. Ahead, Ross half-carried Corporal Wright, while another Marine supported Mendez in a desperate hobble toward tree cover. "Hannah, the drone!" Carver yelled. "Can you give us eyes?" Hannah's fingers fumbled with the controller as she ran, launching the drone from its case without stopping. The small aircraft fought the wind, its rotor screaming protest, but it climbed through the storm and sent back thermal imagery. 3 shooters on the ridgeline, military-grade weapons, professional spacing. "They're hurting us south,"
Hannah called out, analyzing the firing pattern, away from the extraction zones. Then we go east, through the flood channel. It's suicide terrain, but they won't expect it. They veered toward a narrow gorge where water surged waist-deep, moving with enough force to sweep anyone off their feet. Hannah watched Mendez struggle forward, his broken leg a liability that could kill them all. Ross took point, finding handholds in the rock, creating a human chain as they pushed through water that wanted them dead as much as the bullets did. Hannah programmed the drone to execute evasive maneuvers over their last position, its heat signature creating false targets. The shooting shifted, chasing the decoy. Precious seconds bought with technology and desperation.
There, Ross pointed toward a dark opening in the cliff face. Cave system, just like the weather girl promised. They stumbled into the cave as another volley of shots ricocheted off the entrance. Duran positioned Marines at the opening while Hannah activated a chemical light stick. The pale green glow revealed a cavern extending deep into the mountain, its walls marked with petroglyphs that suggested people had sheltered here for centuries. Hannah moved deeper, following Ethan's map, until she found what she'd been hoping for, her brother's mark carved into the stone. An arrow pointing toward a side passage, and beneath it, coordinates that matched nothing on any official chart. She followed the passage, squeezing through gaps that barely admitted her pack until she emerged into a smaller chamber. There, covered in dust and time, was a metal case bearing USMC markings and her brother's name. Hannah's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, a flight data recorder, a personal beacon still showing a faint power indicator, and a data chip wrapped in a note written in Ethan's handwriting. Han, if you found this, I'm probably gone. The beacon will lead you home. The chip contains everything I discovered about Operation Silencer. Colonel Victor Hale is running illegal operations across the border, using rescue missions as cover. Weapons transfers, black site coordination. He's been eliminating anyone who gets close to the truth. I tried to report it through proper channels. That's why I'm here instead of home. Trust Major Carver if you can. Trust yourself always. You're stronger than you believe. Love you forever. E. Hannah pressed the beacon to her chest and let herself cry for exactly 30 seconds. Then, she wiped her eyes, loaded the data chip into her tablet, and returned to where Duran waited. My brother was here, and he left us proof. The data chip contained 3 years of accumulated evidence, flight logs with altered timestamps, communications transcripts showing mission parameters changed mid-operation, satellite imagery of unauthorized helicopter movements across the Mexican border, financial records suggesting weapon sales disguised as equipment losses, and at the center of it all, like a spider in a web, Colonel Victor Hale. Hannah sat in the cave's dim light, reading her brother's final mission logs while the Marines rested and Carver studied the files with growing horror. This goes to the Pentagon level, Carver whispered. Hale has protection. He's been operating with immunity for at least 5 years. Which is why my brother died, Hannah said flatly. He threatened to expose it, so Hale arranged an accident. Duran leaned against the cave wall, his face a mask of betrayal. Hale authorized our current mission. He personally briefed me, told us it was a standard extraction exercise. Nothing about this has been standard, Captain. Hannah pulled up the mission parameters Ethan had decoded. You were sent into this region following the same flight path every lost helicopter has taken. Same altitude, same communications protocols. The only variable was the storm. Hale waited for weather conditions that made recovery impossible. Russ had been listening from the cave entrance, his rifle trained on the darkness outside. Now he turned, his expression harder than Hannah had seen it. So what do? We're stuck in a cave, cut off from command, being hunted by the same people who are supposed to protect us. Hannah looked at Ethan's beacon, its light pulsing with battery power that had somehow survived 5 years. We reach the ridge where satellite visibility is clear. We transmit everything, every file, every log, every piece of evidence my brother and I both found. We flood the system so completely that even Hale can't suppress it. That ridge is 2 clicks north, through terrain we barely survived getting here, with wounded who can't move fast and hostiles who want us silent. Then we move at night, in the storm, use the weather as cover the same way they've been using it as a weapon. Hannah stood, slinging her pack. Captain, my whole life I've been the quiet girl who watches from the sidelines.
I analyzed storms while other people made decisions. I filed reports while other people took action. But right now, 6 Marines need someone who understands this terrain better than the people hunting us. Someone who's been preparing for this moment since the day her brother disappeared. Carver placed a hand on Hannah's shoulder. Your brother trained you for this, maybe not intentionally, but every piece of knowledge he gave you, every skill he taught you, was preparing you to finish what he started. Hannah nodded, feeling something settle in her chest. Not confidence exactly, purpose. Then let's make sure Ethan didn't die for nothing. We reach that ridge by dawn, we transmit everything, and we make sure the world knows what Colonel Hale really is. They emerged from the cave at 0300 hours, moving through darkness so complete that Hannah navigated by instrument alone. The storm had diminished to steady rain, but the temperature had dropped, turning the mountains into a hypothermia trap. They moved in silence, Mendez biting down on leather to keep from crying out, while Wright supported between 2 Marines who'd become brothers through shared survival. Hannah led them through terrain that shouldn't have been passable. Cliff faces they traversed using ropes salvaged from the helicopter. Stream crossings where one slip meant death. Each meter gained felt like victory against a mountain that wanted them buried in its stones.
By 0500, they reached the ridge. Hannah set up her tablet and drone, preparing to transmit Ethan's files through every satellite channel she could access. The beacon pulsed beside her, broadcasting their location to any rescue assets in range. And then, through the morning mist, came the sound of rotors. Thank God, Ross breathed. Extraction. But something in the helicopter's approach made Hannah's instincts scream. Too direct, too certain of their location. She checked her tablet. The beacon's signal should have been too weak for such precise navigation. Unless someone had been tracking them all along. The Black Hawk settled on the ridge, its rotors throwing water in great sheets. The side door opened and a man emerged. Late 40s, silver hair, dress uniform decorated with commendations that spoke of a career built on heroism. He smiled like someone greeting old friends. Captain Duran, Colonel Victor Hale called over the rotors. Thank God you're alive. When we lost your signal, we feared the worst. Hannah's blood turned to ice. She caught Carver's eye, saw the Major's expression shift from relief to realization to horror. Colonel Hale, Duran said carefully, we've had quite an ordeal. Multiple hostiles in the area. Equipment sabotage. We need immediate evacuation and a full investigation. Of course, of course. Hale's smile never wavered. But first, I'll need you to surrender all recording devices. Mission security protocols. I'm sure you understand. Sir, with respect, we're not carrying classified material to standard... Captain? I'm not asking. Hale's voice hardened. All electronic devices, all recording equipment, all data storage. Now. Hannah stood slowly, her tablet clutched to her chest. You killed my brother. Hale's attention shifted to her with the focus of a predator identifying prey. Miss Cole, I heard you'd volunteered to help search. How admirable. How tragically unnecessary. You've been eliminating witnesses. Anyone who discovered your operation. You shot down Captain Duran's helicopter the same way you shot down my brother's helicopter. Hannah's voice remained steady despite the fury building in her chest. But Ethan left evidence. He left everything. And I'm going to make sure the world knows what you did. Give me the tablet, Miss Cole. No. Hale gestured and soldiers emerged from the helicopter, weapons raised. Professional, cold. Men who followed orders without question. Hannah, Carver said quietly, don't. Major Carver, I'm disappointed. I thought you'd learned your lesson about questioning command after the Cole incident 5 years ago. I learned I should have listened, and I won't make that mistake twice. The standoff stretched across seconds that felt like hours. Ross's hand moved toward his sidearm. Hale's soldiers tensed. Hannah calculated distances and probabilities and concluded they were all going to die on this ridge. Then Ross moved. Subtle. Just a slight shift behind the group, and pressed something on his damaged radio that made the sound like the chirp of a digital bird. Emergency beacon. The real one. Broadcasting on a frequency Hale wouldn't be monitoring. Hale's smile finally cracked. Sergeant Ross,
That was unwise. Yeah, well, unwise is kind of my thing, sir. The colonel's expression went flat. He nodded once, and his soldiers advanced, weapons trained on the group. Take them all. And Sergeant, destroy that equipment before... The second helicopter appeared over the ridge so fast it seemed to materialize from the storm itself, larger, marked with federal investigation insignia. Its loudspeaker crackled to life. Colonel Hale, stand down. This site is under federal jurisdiction. You and your men will lower your weapons and submit to questioning. Hannah watched Hale's face cycle through disbelief, rage, and finally calculation. He was already forming his defense, already planning how to spin this narrative. But Hannah raised her tablet, showing the data transfer completing to multiple government servers, multiple news organizations, multiple congressional oversight committees. Too late, Colonel. My brother's evidence just went everywhere, and this time, the truth won't disappear into classified files. Hale stared at her with pure hatred. Then federal agents were swarming the ridge, taking custody of his soldiers, reading him rights he probably thought didn't apply to men like him. Carver moved beside Hannah, watching justice finally arrive, 5 years too late.
Your brother would be proud, the major said quietly. Hannah looked at the mountains where Ethan had died, where she'd almost died, where truth had been buried under classified stamps and convenient accidents. He better be, she whispered, because I'm not done yet. The sky chose that moment to split open with lightning that turned night into noon. The bolt struck so close that Hannah felt electricity crawl across her skin, every hair standing at attention. Thunder followed instantly, a physical force that knocked Ross to his knees and sent Hale's soldiers scrambling for cover. Nature had decided to join the fight. Now, Hannah shouted over the storm's roar. Move now while they're blind. But Hale recovered faster than his men, his hand shooting out to grab Hannah's arm. You're not going anywhere with that evidence. Duran moved like violence given form, his fist connecting with Hale's jaw hard enough to send the colonel sprawling. Touch her again, and I'll forget you're an officer. Hale's soldiers raised their weapons, but the federal agents had theirs up faster. Mexican standoff on a mountain ridge while lightning turned the world into a strobe light and rain fell with enough force to bruise. Stand down! The lead federal agent, a woman with steel-gray hair and the kind of voice that expected obedience, moved between the groups. Colonel Hale, you're under investigation. Captain Duran, your testimony is required. Ms. Cole, that evidence is now federal property. Not yet, it isn't. Hannah backed toward the edge of the ridge, her tablet clutched against her chest. I transmitted copies, but the original files stay with me until I know they won't disappear into classified limbo. Another lightning strike hit the Black Hawk Hale had arrived in. The helicopter's electronics exploded in a shower of sparks, and the aircraft listed dangerously as its systems died. Hale's pilot fought the controls, but physics and storm had made their decision. The helicopter slid sideways off the ridge, rotors clipping rock, and tumbled into the gorge below in a screaming cascade of metal and fire. Jesus Christ! One of Hale's soldiers dropped his weapon, staring at the burning wreckage. Hannah's mind calculated trajectories and probabilities with the cold clarity that came from years of watching storms kill. Everyone off this ridge, lightnings following the electrical systems, were sitting on a conductor plate. The federal helicopter lifted off immediately, its pilot recognizing the danger. But the ridge had become a killing ground, lightning striking in rapid succession, each bolt seeking the path of least resistance through panicked humans wearing metal equipment. The flood channel had pointed toward the gorge they'd traversed hours earlier. It's the only path down that won't kill us. That's suicide,
Hale shouted. "The water flow will sweep us away." "Then you die here, or you trust me." Hannah was already moving, her boots slipping on wet stone. "Your choice, Colonel." Duran didn't hesitate. "Marines, follow Cole! Move!" They plunged into chaos made liquid. The flash flood channel had transformed into a raging river, water surging with enough force to carry boulders. Hannah led them along the narrow ledge above the torrent, one hand on Ethan's journal in her pocket, like a talisman, the other gripping handholds that crumbled under her weight. Behind them, Hale's remaining soldiers followed, their training overriding their orders. Even the federal agents came, the lead investigator cursing as she navigated terrain that should have required specialized climbing equipment. Mendez stumbled, his broken leg finally giving out. He would have fallen into the water if Ross hadn't grabbed his collar, hauling him back with strength born from months of carrying packs heavier than men. "I got you, Bear," Ross gasped. "Not losing anyone else today." Lightning struck the ridge they'd abandoned, the rock face exploding in a cascade of superheated stone. Hannah heard screaming behind her and turned to see one of Hale's soldiers hanging from the ledge, his hand slipping on wet rock. She didn't think, didn't calculate, just moved. Hannah dropped to her stomach, reaching down to grab the soldier's wrist. He was heavier than she expected, gravity and water, both trying to claim him. Her shoulder screamed where it had been injured in the earlier crash, but she held on. "I've got him." Duran added his strength, and together they hauled the soldier up. The man gasped, staring at Hannah with something between gratitude and confusion. "You saved me, after everything." "You were following orders. Now follow me."
They continued the descent through hell, painted in lightning and rain. The storm had evolved beyond meteorological event into biblical judgment. Thunder that sounded like the mountain breaking apart, wind that tried to pluck them from the cliffs and cast them into the void. Hannah pulled out flares from her pack, igniting them and throwing them into side canyons. The bright light reflected off the water and mist, creating false targets that drew lightning away from their group. It was a trick Ethan had taught her during a camping trip when she was 16, back when storms were just weather instead of weapons. "You're using the storm," Carver shouted over the wind, genuine awe in her voice. "The storm doesn't care who's right or wrong," Hannah called back. "It just is. We survive by understanding it, not fighting it." Ahead, a flash flood surged through their path, cutting off the route. Hannah checked her tablet, but the screen had cracked during the descent, displaying only fragments of data. She closed her eyes, picturing Ethan's map, feeling the terrain the way her brother had taught her to feel it. "There's a cave entrance 20 meters east," she said with certainty she couldn't explain. "It connects to a tunnel system that bypasses this section." "How do you know?" Hale demanded. He looked diminished now, his uniform soaked, his authority stripped by federal custody and nature's indifference. "Because my brother mapped every meter of these mountains before you killed him." Hannah met his eyes without flinching, "and he taught me to see what others miss." The cave was exactly where she said it would be. They squeezed through an opening barely wide enough for Mendez's shoulders, emerging into a cavern system that smelled of mineral water and ancient stone. Hannah activated another chemical light, and its glow revealed passages leading deeper into the mountain. Behind them, the storm continued its assault on the world above, but here, in the Earth's belly, they found temporary sanctuary. Duran positioned his Marines at the entrance while the federal agents secured Hale and his remaining soldiers. The lead investigator approached Hannah, extending a hand. "Special Agent Victoria Chen, FBI." That was impressive navigation under impossible conditions. Hannah shook her hand, surprised to find her own wasn't shaking. "Just reading the terrain." "Just saved 17 lives, more like." Chen gestured toward the cave entrance, where lightning continued its violent display. "When this storm passes, I'll need your full testimony about Colonel Hale's operations." "I'll get it. Every detail." Hannah pulled out her tablet, its cracked screen still showing the transmission log,
But the evidence speaks for itself. My brother documented everything. I just made sure it couldn't be buried again. Chen studied her with professional assessment. Hannah Cole, the quiet meteorologist who exposed a 5-year conspiracy. That's going to be quite a story. I don't want a story, Hannah said quietly. I want justice for my brother and every Marine who died because someone in command decided their lives were expendable. You'll get it. I promise you that. Hours later, when the storm finally exhausted its fury, rescue helicopters arrived to extract the survivors. Hannah watched Mendez and Wright loaded onto medical transport, Ross joking with the flight medics, even as exhaustion lined his face, Duran coordinating evacuation with the efficiency of a man born to lead. Major Carver stood beside her as the sun broke through clouds for the first time in 2 days. Your brother would be proud of you, Carver said again. Hannah looked at the mountains where so much had been lost and found. He'd probably say I took too long to figure it out. He'd be wrong. Carver placed something in Hannah's hand. Dog tags. Worn metal, stamped with Ethan's name and service number. We recovered these from the cave where you found his equipment. I think he'd want you to have them. Hannah closed her fist around the tags, feeling their weight. Proof her brother had existed. Proof he mattered. Proof his death meant something beyond a classified file and a folded flag. Thank you, Major. Call me Evelyn. I think we're past formalities. The base commander's office at Granite Ridge felt too small for the weight of history being written. Hannah sat across from Colonel James Parker, while Special Agent Chen laid out evidence that would end careers and possibly send people to prison. Ethan's files covered every surface, printed and bound, and impossible to ignore. This is a national security disaster, Parker said, his face gray. The implications alone. The implications are that someone in our chain of command murdered American service members to cover up illegal operations, and continued doing so for 5 years. The disaster isn't the exposure, Colonel. It's what was being covered up.
Hannah watched the argument with detached interest. 3 days since the mountain. 3 days of debriefings and medical examinations, and sleeping in a real bed that felt too soft after nights on stone. 3 days of waiting for the other shoe to drop, for someone to declare her evidence inadmissible or her testimony unreliable. But the media had gotten hold of the story. Leaked files flooding news organizations. Congressional oversight committees calling emergency sessions. The machinery of accountability grinding to life after years of rust. Ms. Cole, Parker said, turning to her, your actions, while ultimately helpful, violated multiple protocols. You inserted yourself into a military operation without authorization. You commandeered equipment. She saved 6 Marines. Duran's voice cut through from the doorway. He stood in fresh uniform, his posture parade ground perfect despite the bruises still visible on his face, and exposed a conspiracy that would have continued killing our people. With respect, sir, Hannah Cole deserves a medal, not a lecture. Parker's expression flickered between annoyance and resignation. Captain Duran, this is a closed meeting. Then open it, because if we're discussing Hannah's actions, her entire team should be present. Ross appeared beside Duran, then Mendez on crutches, his leg freshly casted. One by one, the surviving Marines filed into the office until the small space felt like a ceremony instead of an interrogation. We're here to testify, Ross said, about how a civilian meteorologist led us through impossible terrain, outmaneuvered hostile forces, and refused to let the truth stay buried. So if there's any question about her actions, you're questioning all of ours. Parker looked at the assembled Marines, then at Chen's implacable expression, then at Hannah, who sat quietly waiting for judgment from men who'd never walked through lightning to reach the truth. Fine, the colonel said heavily. Agent Chen, proceed with your investigation. Captain Duran, prepare your after-action reports. Ms. Cole. He paused, searching for words that didn't come easily. Thank you for your service to the Corps, even if it was unconventional. The official investigation took weeks. Hannah testified before military tribunals,
congressional committees, and federal grand juries. She told Ethan's story and her own, watching powerful men squirm as their carefully constructed lies collapsed under the weight of documented evidence. Colonel Victor Hale was charged with conspiracy, murder, weapons trafficking, and a dozen other crimes that would ensure he died in a federal prison. His network of accomplices folded like dominoes, each one trying to cut deals by implicating others. The corruption had run deeper than even Ethan suspected, reaching into Pentagon procurement offices and congressional defense committees. But the official recognition Hannah sought for her brother never came. Ethan remained as classified as killed in action, his true investigation buried under national security restrictions. No medals, no public acknowledgement, just a file marked top secret that most people would never read. "It's not fair," Ross said during one of his visits to the weather station where Hannah had returned to work. "Your brother deserves to be remembered as a hero." "He is remembered," Hannah replied, watching storms build on her radar screens the way she always had. "By the people who matter, by his sister who finished what he started, by the Marines who are alive because his evidence saved them." She smiled slightly. "Heroes don't need medals, Sergeant. They need people who refuse to let their sacrifice be meaningless." 6 months after the mountain, Hannah received a letter on Pentagon stationery. Inside was an invitation to head a new joint military-civilian safety initiative focused on preventing command-level corruption and ensuring transparency in remote operations. The program would require her expertise in terrain analysis, weather forecasting, and, the letter noted carefully, independent thinking under pressure. "They want you to be the watchdog," Carver said when Hannah called her. The major had been reinstated with full honors after her decision to support the investigation, promoted to lieutenant colonel and assigned to the Pentagon Oversight Office. Someone who can't be bullied or bought or convinced to look the other way. "It sounds exhausting," Hannah said. "It sounds necessary. Will you do it?" Hannah looked at Ethan's dog tags hanging above her desk, at the picture of him in his dress uniform, smiling with the confidence of someone who believed truth mattered more than career advancement. "Yes," she said, "I'll do it." The memorial stood on the ridge where everything had changed. Simple granite carved with names and dates, topped with a bronze plaque that read, "In honor of those who sought truth in the storm." Ethan's name headed the list, followed by 3 other Marines whose helicopters had vanished in the same mountains over the past 5 years.
Hannah touched her brother's name, feeling the letters carved deep enough to last centuries. Around her, soldiers and meteorologists gathered for the dedication ceremony, 2 groups that had once operated in separate worlds, now training together under protocols Hannah had helped design. "It's a good memorial," Durant said, standing beside her in his dress uniform. He'd been promoted to major, assigned to lead the new joint training program. Ethan would approve. "He'd probably say it's too fancy," Hannah replied. "He liked things simple." "Nothing about what you accomplished was simple." Durant gestured toward the crowd. "You changed how we operate. Civilian oversight, mandatory transparency protocols, weather analysts embedded with every remote operation, all because one quiet meteorologist refused to accept comfortable lies." Ross joined them, his dress blues somehow looking casual despite military precision. "The guys are calling you the storm whisperer. They mean it as a compliment." Hannah laughed. "Better than the quiet girl with theories." "That was before you led us through hell and out the other side." Ross grew serious. "You know Mendez named his daughter Hannah, born 3 months ago? Said he wanted her to grow up knowing that being quiet doesn't mean being weak." Something caught in Hannah's throat. She blinked away tears, watching the dedication ceremony begin. Generals made speeches about sacrifice and duty. Politicians talked about accountability and reform. But Hannah barely heard them. Her attention was on the line of new recruits standing at attention, young men and women learning that true strength came in many forms. Carver approached as the ceremony ended, her lieutenant colonel insignia gleaming in the afternoon sun. "How does it feel, seeing your vision become reality?"
Strange, Hannah admitted. I spent my whole life being invisible. Now people want me to speak at conferences and train personnel and testify before committees. It's overwhelming. You can handle it. You handled far worse on that mountain. You gave me back my integrity, Hannah. Showed me that doing the right thing matters more than protecting careers. I won't forget that. As the crowd dispersed, Hannah walked to the edge of the ridge. The Sierra Madre stretched before her, beautiful and deadly, hiding secrets in every canyon. But now there were weather stations on the ridges, satellite towers monitoring every valley, systems designed to ensure no one else vanished into classified silence. She pulled out Ethan's journal, its pages even more worn now from constant reference during training sessions. His brother's voice would train Marines for generations. "Did I do okay?" she whispered to the mountains. "Did I make it mean something?" The wind answered, warm and carrying the scent of coming rain. Hannah checked her tablet automatically. A storm system building to the west. Nothing dangerous yet, but she'd monitor it. She'd always monitor. Behind her, she heard laughter. Ross joking with new recruits, Mendez teaching weather recognition techniques with the patience of a father showing his kids how to read the sky. Duran coordinating with civilian meteorologists, asking questions and actually listening to the answers. Carver on her phone, probably fighting some new bureaucratic battle for transparency. All of them here because Hannah Cole, a quiet girl from a small Texas town, had refused to let her brother's death be forgotten, had walked into the storm instead of hiding from it, had led when no one expected her to follow. The storm on the horizon grew, clouds building vertical with the kind of energy that promised violence. A year ago, Hannah would have felt fear watching that formation. Now she felt only readiness, understanding, the knowledge that storms weren't the enemy. They were the test that proved we're alive. Hannah Cole smiled at the gathering clouds, Ethan's dog tags warm against her chest, her brother's journal in her hand, surrounded by people who'd learned that strength doesn't roar. It endures. It persists. It leads the lost home through the darkest storms. And sometimes, when everything else falls apart, the quiet ones hold the loudest courage. Hannah turned from the ridge and walked toward her team, toward the future her brother had died trying to protect, toward storms she would face with eyes wide open and a heart that had learned the difference between hiding and preparing. The rain began to fall, gentle and cleansing, washing the mountains clean, and Hannah Cole walked through it like someone born to weather any storm the world could bring. Because she had survived.
Because she had led them home. Because she was exactly who she needed to be. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.